What's up, folks? It's your man Ron Headback, and welcome to the Dark Lab. Halloween has just been, and the winter nights are getting long, so what better way than to get into that vibe is with some deep ethereal house and that ubiquitous Broken Toybox Rhodes that's going to sound a bit like this. Feel me? Okay, let's have a look in the rack. In this session, I'm going to be teaching you how to make a nice, low, scuzzy stumble and roll beat. That ubiquitous Broken Toybox Rhodes, a nice, low, ethereal chord, and that strange, atmospheric, spooky bird sound that was going on. So let's have a look. So let's start out with our beat. You might have seen in the last tutorial I mentioned how pitching your drums can change the style and the vibe of a track entirely, and that's what's happened here. This track was originally quite upbeat and peppy, so I'll just kind of let you hear what it was and we'll see what it becomes. So for example here. But as you've already heard, pitching those drums down some and it becomes a far more kind of drunken stumble and roll beat like so. So that's a better bedding for our kind of like more ethereal house kind of track. So let's go through the sounds. When you're picking a kick, you want to have something that's a bit of a dull thud and it's feeling a little bit dusty like so. You'll notice here, playing with the probability, just to get away from that straight 4/4, we've got about 41%, 49%, and that's just going to give us a little double or triple bump based upon the probability. Like so. Okay, next up, the hi-hats, and we're doing something a little bit tricksy here. If we just turn these on, and you'll hear. And what that kind of sound there is, that was actually a pedal crash. Just pitched it up a little bit, took the decay down, and using the auxiliary delay on Con, and that is like a step 3 delay, lots of feedback, completely wet. Next up, we'll move on to the clap. Just pretty basic, go for something that's a little bit dry and it'll cut through the kind of earthiness of the kick. Here, again, playing with a little bit of probability. You've got the old on the 2 and on the 4 for the clap, but then in between that on the 3 and then the final, just a little probability play there of 40 or 30%, and that's just kind of giving a little bit of a step to the beat itself. So that's just keeping things interesting and moving along. Talking of claps, also added this in, and you can too, and that's just to make things a little bit snappy. What I have here is a clap, and I'm again using the auxiliary on this. And here that is some more delay, but not as feeding back as much, longer step. And that is what I'm going to do with that, is just bring up the tone up and down. And this isn't for the main percussion, this is just to add a little bit of extra spice and snap to when things are going, perhaps for a breakdown, perhaps for building up. So if you just check that like this. So you see what I mean? You can just kind of bring that in and out a little bit now and again. Next up, we have our toms. Haven't really done anything crazy with these here, just kind of intermittent coming in and out. Again, with the low tom and the even higher tom, we have a little bit of probability play here again, because that kind of, when they're coming in and out, it actually mistimes the beat a little bit, and that kind of adds to that again, that kind of slightly drunken sway. So if we just check this. So you see is there sometimes they're coming in and coming out. It's just like making you kind of jar a little bit. And last up, we have the snare. And that's a really kind of like boxy sounding, snappy snare. Like so, usually with house beats, when you're doing is you go for that, the double knock. For example, we'll just see here. We have just the kick, the hi-hat, the clap, and the snare. So you have this. That's your kind of standard snare double knock. But when we bring this in here, we're taking that off by 2 steps, and we don't want it coming in all the time. So it kind of adds to that kind of stop, roll, back and forth, like so. You see what I mean? Okay, so next up we'll look at the effects, because there's quite a lot going on here. First up we have the reverb. Well, actually no, let's listen to the beat just on its own. That is flat as a pancake. So we really want to give it some space. Because this is kind of ethereal house, we kind of want it to have a bit more body and kind of surround about it. So what I did here is this is just the reverb, completely wet. So check this. So headphones on for that, because you'll have noticed that there's quite a bit of like panning going on. It's maybe a little bit too much. I think I might dial it down actually a bit. And how we do that is we bring in a pulsar. Basically what we do is we go and put this on of a rate 4/4, so that it's just in time with the beat. The level was a little bit too high there, but we're just going to bring that up. And we chain the output of that LFO into the pan CV in of the micro mixer. So you'll notice there how it's kind of sweeping backwards and forwards. Don't overdo it, you know, it can become a little bit too gimmicky, but it's just, it adds an extra sense of space to your beat. So we'll just go with the reverb and then bring in the dry, clean beat. Now clean. So that kind of vibe there. Because I was playing with this with the reverb, and it's just kind of like, you know, auto panning a little bit round, my kind of mind went to, why do I want to try rotor? And you might think of rotor on your beats, you know, why not? Let's just see what it sounds like. Because I wanted that sound to be kind of accentuated. So I prepared the rotor to be slightly contradictory to the reverb panning. So for that, you just kind of tune around. And plus as well with the reverb, you can kind of lose a little bit at the bottom end. Because this is quite a scuzzy beat, we kind of want to crunch things up a bit. So rotor is providing that for you. So we'll just check rotor, the reverb, then the clean. Reverb. And clean. So that's sounding pretty scuzzy. There's plenty of movement. It's a really good bedding and basis for our track to go on. So we'll get onto the instruments next. Okay, so having a look at our first sound, if we just go down to that. And sorry, reason I'm using massive, I'm not using one of the rack sounds, but we use what we can for the style and the setting. I probably could have used one of the other synths, but this was just a nice chord that I came across. And we're going to work kind of like from the bottom up, our bottom end, our mid-range, and then our top end of things. So if we just check this first, you'll see. A nice kind of full spooky sounding kind of chord that's going on there. And what we're doing here is, again, very similar with the micromix. You could do this with sound effects, but it tends to wash things out a little bit. It depends the kind of look that you're, the kind of sound that you're going for. I do this quite a lot because I can dial in just the dry and the wet, you know, for example, my dry signal and my reverb, and just kind of adjust the flavor. So we'll check out what's happening just with the verb there. Because I'm using RV7000 and that's using an echo slow analog effect, which has got quite a step to it, it's putting things slightly out of time. So I'm going to bring in the dry and just increase that, and you'll hear what's going on because it gives a nice kind of wraparound effect. You see what I mean? And again, I'm kind of using that technique of doing a little bit of panning with that, not going too, oh, actually, I'm going a bit crazy with that. I should maybe dial it down. But that is a slower rate of 2/4, and I'm bringing up the shuffle a little bit so that it's just almost perfectly in time. For doing this kind of thing, what you want to do, as I said before, this is a simpler example. You take your audio output, you put it into Spider Audio, you chain it together, and then kind of think about working backwards. Take your audio output of the reverb, take the input coming down here, and then you want to take the output of your dry and putting that to the first channel. So it's a pretty neat technique. I use this a lot, so feel free to steal it. It can be a little bit too gimmicky sometimes if you're really playing with the pan a lot, but I just find it gives a bit of extra depth and space. So that's the low end of things sorted out. This song is actually based around just the same chord for the different instruments, and you'll see how that's going to be working out. So I'll move on to the next sound. So on to our next instrument, and that's that ubiquitous Broken Toybox Rhodes. It gets used in so many different genres: house, trap, trip hop, hip hop, and we're going to see about making this. And what we have here is a Suitcase 73 and various players and effects. Now, you may not all have Suitcase 73. It's a rack extension. It's a really good Rhodes emulation. I recommend you give it a try. But so that you guys can get a try of this, is I have made a version that is using an NNXT, and that is using one of the factory presets for Rhodes. So it's almost as close as, I just like using the Suitcase 73s because it's a real good sound. And what we're actually doing is we're building this from the original chord that we're using in the Massive. So that's sounding like this. So we'll go in and look in the sequencer. We'll turn off all the effects and the players, and we'll build this up. So here is the original Massive chord that was being played. Very simple, nothing fancy. We're taking a copy of that, and then we're just going to pitch that up by 1 octave. On its own, it's just sounding like this. Nothing spooky about that, so let's spook it up a little bit, and we're going to use scales and chords. So we're going to enable these, and we're using C chromatic here with a bit of inversion, and that's just to make a bit of a dissonant chord, so you'll hear the change already. So that's a little bit more dramatic and kind of jarring, horror movie kind of feel. But we don't want it to be that jarring, so we're going to switch on the Arp, and we're beginning to get this effect. So we're beginning to get that kind of toy box feel to it. So as you saw, that is just beginning to get a little bit more spooky, and to kind of add that tinkle at the top, we are going to add a no echo. and that is on step length 132, which is quite quick. 2 repeats, pitch is coming up 1 octave, and a little bit of velocity bump, so it's beginning to sound like this. So we're kind of going back to that slightly jarring feeling with the note echo there. But what is really kind of bringing this on is the effects. Now, first up, we'll enable the delay, and that's just a double delay. We're kind of feeding in here. We're not totally going stereo on this. We're taking one here, and that's going to kind of give us a nice jangle. So if you check that. So you feel me? Just kind of things are getting pretty spooky there and beginning to move around. Now, the next effect we have is the reverser, and that's kind of giving that far more ethereal sound. So we'll just have a little play with that. We'll take it right down and we'll gradually bring it in. Don't go too crazy with this. You can maybe ramp all the way up if you're kind of doing a breakdown or you're just doing an introduction or an outro, because it kind of really unravels the more you're putting in there. Some of you might be thinking, well, I don't have kilohertz reverser. Well, I would recommend that you go to Reason Studio Store, and it's free. And I don't know about you, but I really like free. It's a great price. So definitely go and check it out. There's a lot more other effects in there, so go and check that. So you'll notice now we have our kind of full Broken Toybox that's coming in and out. And we have a frequency so that we can just have that drift in and out. We don't want this kind of like in the listener's ears or in their face all the time. So we're just kind of drifting it in, drifting it out, because the beat is quite low and scuzzy, so that's hooking the listener's body. The chords are there as a nice kind of fat, basis for the mid-range of the Broken Toybox. And so you just want to kind of drift this in and out a bit so that it's kind of giving the, is this happening, is it not kind of feel. And play a little bit with the dry wet of the effect and the amount of reverse mix. So that's sounding pretty cool. Now we've covered the low end, the mid range with the Toybox. So we'll move on to something that's a little bit on the high end of things, and that's just to kind of break out from all that kind of lower end sound. So next instrument is Spooky Birds, and that was that kind of strange atmosphere that was going over the top of things. This sound came about via Misadventure, so we'll just kind of go through how this was made. And this is just a very simple note that is just going to be strummed and then arped. So if you just listen to it on its own. Just a single ping that's going on there. But if we bring on the note echo, we begin to get a bit of a strum. And this is using just a very simple chromatic sound in Europa. So let's just check this. We have our note echo, and that is not using tempo sync. We have step length on this, so that's about 87 milliseconds, and it's not exactly on time, so it gives that slightly kind of like wonky feel to things. We're going to repeats all the way up, and we're not going to be pitching it or anything like that, so we just check that. So you see what I mean there by that kind of slightly wonky feel, and that's just by playing subtly with your step length. And then as a kind of break away from that, we want to bring in our dual arp. So we'll just see what this is like. It's just bringing a bit of kind of eerie top end to things. Now, next we have our effects, and this is where the kind of misadventure began. So when I'm writing a track, I'll usually try and take a device that I don't use very often or I'm not very used to. And I've always kind of looked at Audiomatic and just kind of thought, well, I can make my own effects. This is kind of seems a little bit preset-ish. So I thought, you know, what the heck, I'll go and take out Audiomatic and see what I can do with this. When I chose this, I just thought, well, okay, I'll take the most random, bizarre preset that I couldn't really find a purpose for. So that is eerie, and we'll play that back and we'll bring it in and enable that. And you'll notice that there's a dial here called spookiness, because we can take in the dry and the wet, and we have the Audiomatic it can just be that signal. And this is where the kind of misadventure. As I was kind of trying to tune things, I thought, well, I'll play with the transform a little bit. And this is where the kind of spooky bards comes in. And you see you've got like play with the transform for spooky bards trapped in a factory, because that's just the vibe it felt like when it came out. So who'd have thought it, just playing with the transform and you get that kind of really freaky, spooky effect. So like I say, take a device that you're not used to or you perhaps don't like a little bit, play around with it and you'll probably be quite surprised. So for our last instrument, we're going to just add some real bottom growl to this, and that is using Subtractor with a nice subby bass. This is a bass line that just isn't too complicated. Just a little kind of accentuate at the start, a bit of a gap so that the kick can breathe, and then some quite rapid notes and a step down. So that's going to sound like this. So a nice scuzzy, fuzzy bass that's just setting everything off perfectly there. So I'll bear with then to finish this off with a nice spooky sample from a horror movie. Props if you recognise this where it's from. So we'll just bring it all together.
How terrible was brings the prophets.
So there we have it. That's Hallowed Beats. As you saw, just taking a completely different approach to your drum, pitching it down, adding some effects, and reach into the Reason rack to go and find a device that you're not too familiar with, you maybe don't like so much, and then you're going to find something that's completely new and random. So keep on creating, find many reasons for using Reason, and I'll see you in the next side. Peace.